This match is really hotting up, so Chucky is now in a must-win situation. He's 5-3 down, it's the best of 10 games. What can he do here with the white pieces? Let's have a look what happened. So he kicks off with pawn to e4, and Alireza goes pawn e5. So no Sicilian, he's trying to shut this thing down, make a draw, and we see that now after knight to f3, he goes knight f6. I've never actually seen him play the Petrov before, so this has got a reputation for being a rock solid opening, very drawish if the players want to steer it towards that line. So we had takes on e5, now the pawn comes to d6, and after the knight retreats, black picks up the pawn back. And now lots of the top players play knight c3 in this position. It imbalances the position immediately because you have the change in pawn structure, and white will often be castling queenside, preparing a kingside attack. But we didn't have knight c3 from Chucky. He goes for pawn d4, the so-called classical variation, and this can be trickier to prove an advantage against. So pawn d5 played, the bishop came to d3, and now knight c6 from Chucky, one of the main moves. You can also start with bishop e7, bishop d6 is a line. And now white doesn't want to be taking this knight here. You simply kick the knight on f3. There's problems against the d4 pawn, not good. So instead white goes castles here. We had bishop to e7, the rook came to e1 hitting the knight, and bishop f5 defended it. You actually see bishop g4 more commonly played there, but this is a perfectly respectable way to play. This knight now came to d2, so the knight is now overwhelmingly pressured. It chops on d2 here, and the queen recaptures, so that after takes on d3, you can recapture with the queen there. So you can already see pieces are getting traded off, the pawn structure is symmetrical. What's Chucky going to do here in a must-win situation? Well, Alireza castles. c3 was the starting move of the middle game here, so it just bolsters the centre, stops any knight b4 excursions. Now you're ready to carry on developing. We had queen to d7 from Alireza, he activates his queen, connects his rooks, and now bishop to f4 from Chucky, and this is the only challenge for black here. We can see that white already has the rook on the only open file on the board, the bishop is superior to its counterpart, the knight is superior to its counterpart, so there is a little bit of pressure for white here. Black has to tread carefully to equalise. And the best move here would have been something like rook a to e8, or possibly even bishop to d6 immediately. Yes, white could go queen to b5 here, but then you can actually go bishop d6. Say you have a trade here, queen takes. Well, if you pick up the pawn on b7, black can swing back over. After the queen goes, you pick up on b2. And the reason I mention all of this is because Alireza plays against this queen b5 move in just a moment now. So instead of bringing the rook across immediately to the e-file, he goes pawn to a6, stopping queen b5. But actually this is a loss of time, because now Chucky gets rook to e3. When the rook comes to the e-file, he doubles on the file first. And it's now a tad uncomfortable for Firouzja. He wants to go bishop d6 for example, but now you can trade here. You can't take back with the queen or you're simply losing a rook. So you'd have to take on e3 first. Now the queen can recapture. Then yes, you take the bishop back, but once again, white owns the only open file. Some uncomfortable pressure there. So that's why he burnt about a minute on the clock here, thinking about what to do. You can tell he's a bit uncomfortable in the position, and he went bishop to d8 here instead, challenging the e-file, but that's a bit of a miserable piece. And now Chucky has this opportunity to generate a kingside initiative, and he seizes it. So he goes pawn h4 here. He wants to run this one down, start creating some weaknesses on the kingside. So pawn f6 from Alireza, a good move, taking control of these key squares. The knight might want to jump there in future otherwise. Now we had pawn h5 from Chucky, and so he opens up a new opportunity for the knight now. It can come into h4, where it then stares at these weakened light squares on the king side. So Alireza chopped a pair of rooks here. The queen recaptured, keeping control of that open file. And now Alireza goes knight to e7. I just want to show you if he had gone something like king to f7 here, preparing rook e8 to challenge the file. Well, white can retain a small edge with something like, say, queen to d3. You probe against this pawn. Does black want to go g6 or h6? Do you step the king back? Then knight h4 can come. It's just to show the point here that white has some pressure really, however black plays. So knight e7 was tried by Alireza. He's coming into this f5 square. We had knight h4 covering that one. Now king f7 played, and the queen sat on f3 now, again just probing on these light squares and also x-raying the king here. So we had rook e8 from Alireza. He comes to that open file finally. And now a tidy move from Chucky, pawn to g3, just holding his minor pieces, giving the king some luft, and he is a bit up on the clock here, about a minute and a half, so pressure on Alireza. He now goes knight to f5, and this is actually an excellent move, because this rook is unprotected, so say you take the rook on e8, well you're not taking with check, and so black can actually chuck in this Zug, take the knight on h4, so you'd have to take with the pawn like this, the king could recapture, the position's completely equalised, white has this ruined pawn structure. So after this move of knight to f5, instead Chucky goes knight g2, an excellent move, because after captures, knight captures, he retains this small edge, he's got this cramping pawn here, his king is slightly safer, he still has the better bishop. So pressure on Alireza and his clock is ticking down. And before I show you the rest of the game, if you are enjoying this video, do hit that like button to let me know and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. So here we had the move pawn to g5 from Alireza. Now this is actually a great move because you kick the bishop away from this very powerful f4 square. If white captures here, which is I'm sure all that Alireza was anticipating, then you recapture with the pawn, you're preparing pawn g5, and black is coming back slightly into the game. But Chucky's response was an excellent one in time pressure because it really mixed things up. He goes bishop takes on g5, using the x-ray against the king here. Now Alireza was a bit shaken by this move because he hadn't seen it, and there's a psychological pressure that goes onto you when you haven't seen a move. His best response here was actually to just take that bishop, because although white can go g4, this is the follow-up, winning back the piece. You could go, say, king to g7 after captures here, then you can blockade with the king here. Okay, that king triangulation looks slightly weird, but my trusty assistant here tells me that's the best way to play. Regardless, black is doing okay, materials level, white still has a lot to prove here, even though they're slightly better. But Alireza didn't take the piece on g5, the simplest way to play. He went queen to e6 instead, attacking this undefended knight, but this is just a blunder. There are different ways to prove that, but Chucky goes with the best one, bishop to d2, and he simply holds this knight now, he's won a clean pawn. So the knight came back to d6, it's looking to hit this e4 square, and now Chucky has different ways to improve the position. He could go knight d3 for example. He chooses this knight c2 plan because he's heading for this f5 square where the knight will be a monster. So knight e4 played by Alireza. The bishop came to f4, pawn c6, preparing to move the bishop without the pawn being taken. Now we had knight e3. The bishop came to e7, and after pawn g4, this beautiful outpost on f5 is solidified. Alireza's time's getting low. He goes king to e8, coming away from these x-rays. The knight hit f5, and now the best move here was king to d7, but white would still retain about a +2 advantage, doing well here. But Alireza blundered. He went queen g8. He's looking for some play here, pressuring this pawn, but the problem now is there's a lot of pressure down the e file, and queen e2 exploits that. So you're preparing pawn f3 to kick the knight away and then checkmate black on e7. Now here, Alireza actually resigned the position, but if he'd gone queen to f8, for example, defending e7, well now you can go pawn f3, say the knight retreats to g5, bishop d6 is a killer. You're about to win a whole piece, it's completely crushing. So Chucky sets us up for a really tense and exciting 10th game that he has to win. Do hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel for more, and see my Magnus Alireza playlist, click here. Thanks for watching, see you soon.